Hello, friends. Welcome to the Nexus Podcast. I'm your host, James Dice. Each week, I fire questions at the leaders of the smart buildings industry to try to figure out where we're headed and how we can get there faster without all the marketing fluff. I'm pushing my learning to the limit, and I'm so glad to have you here following along. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Nexus Pro. Nexus Pro is an annual or monthly subscription where members get exclusive writing, podcasts, and invites to members-only Zoom gatherings. You can find info on how to join and support the podcast at nexuslabs.online. Without further ado, please enjoy this episode of the Nexus Podcast. Episode 42 is a conversation with Aaron Lapsley, founder of System2 Consulting. We talked about Aaron's awesome resume in smart buildings, and I picked his brain on what he's learned from his years at Cushman Wakefield, switch automation, and more. Then we took a bit of a deep dive into smart building strategy, and Aaron gave me a buzzword and hype-free update on what's going on in the world of IAQ and RESET in the COVID era. Without further ado, please enjoy Nexus Podcast episode 42. Hey, Aaron, welcome to the Nexus Podcast. Can you introduce yourself for us?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, James. Happy to be here. My name is Aaron Lapsley. I'm an engineer, management consultant, and a general technologist in real estate.
And I remember when I first started the podcast, I talked to Deb Noller, who's a friend of both of ours. She told me to have you on, and it took me almost a year to actually have you here. So that's great. Can you kind of give us a background on your career? And I want to dig into a lot of different areas of your career, but I think there are very few that have the sort of pedigree you have in our industry. So maybe take us through like a resume of all the cool stuff you've done.
Sure. Yeah. I'll try to keep it brief. Deb, had a huge impact on my career and the time I spent with switch automation, and I've got a lot of folks like that have really made a big impact on me. So I do appreciate her. So I have this strange sort of breadth of experience in real estate services. I've always worked around buildings or energy. So I started my career, I'm a mechanical engineering student, University of Oklahoma. I started out in the energy industry, upstream oil and gas. And so I worked for a year, worked for a drill bit company, worked some in the field with a friend of mine's family company, putting together surface equipment, learning mostly. And then I did the first year of a master's degree in petroleum engineering. Then I decided I didn't want to work in the oil and gas industry anymore. It was a rough time for the oil business in the mid 2000s. So my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, had moved up to New York. I wanted a big change of pace. And so I moved up to New York without a job. And I wanted to get into engineering consulting, HVAC engineering, which I save that story for another day over a beer, but I did over a short period of time, get into that industry and had a very successful career with Loeffler Associates in New York. So I designed HVAC, did a lot of analysis. I got LEED accredited before I got my professional engineering license in 2007, which was early days for LEED. It was LEED 2.1, I believe, is what we took the test on. I actually had to pull my credential out the other day, and I was remembering back. And so we were kind of starting the early stages of the sustainable design studio, and we're doing a lot of kind of energy project work too, energy modeling, retrofits and upgrades, constant work like that going on in New York. And it got me very interested in the energy side of buildings. And started to tie those two things together. I ended up going to do an MBA. I went to Harvard Business School, was very fortunate to get in there. And that's just, an absurdly transformational experience that you don't, get very often.
Right.
And really, really accelerated my career. I ended up doing kind of a lot of people go into management consulting after an MBA, a 2-year continuation of business school. So I worked for Deloitte Consulting for another year and a half or so. And about half the time I worked in corporate real estate work. They have a good corporate real estate practice. And I got more exposure to the technology side. Cool. I should also say that what got me into building tech in general is at HBS, we did a field study where you can substitute a project for a class.
Okay.
And it was with McKinstry up in Seattle, that's a design, build, operate, maintain contractor, really fantastic company.
Mm-hmm.
And they had purchased some of the engineering energy software assets from Itron and were looking to explore what to do to build a business around active energy management. And there's a lot of companies that do that kind of work now, but it was early days in 2010, and we helped them with a strategy on that. And it really got me thinking at that time about why we weren't doing centralized operations for real estate more. So then just fast forwarding quickly, ended up going to a boutique consultant, doing smart building programs, integrating BMS data, setting up centralized operations centers. Ended up going and working for Switch Automation, was the first US employee as they came over from Sydney and built the headquarters in San Francisco. And, had an amazing time there, startup experience, helped them with product, helped them build the services team that's now flourishing and doing amazing things. And then ended up going over to work for Daryl Smith, who had just brought in Cushman Wakefield as his FM provider at Google after that. And that was kind of another really amazing experience on building technology. So did a variety of things, ran energy management, ran building technology programs, and ultimately had this experience to be able to go in and do that at a corporate level for Cushman, which I'm sure we'll talk about more.
Absolutely. We had another mutual friend, Dennis Krieger, who introduced us that you guys are big fans of each other, which is fun. Yeah. So shout out to Dennis for making this conversation happen. Can you tell us about System2? So you left Cushman recently and started your own thing, System2. So tell us what's all up with that.
Sure. Yeah. Started System2 Consulting as a vehicle to do engineering consulting work, actually a number of years ago, and then hadn't done very much with it. Really got it fired up in earnest in November after leaving Cushman. And, look, I just saw major opportunity to move into providing services directly to clients. And so starting to pursue that now. As a firm, it's a consulting and engineering firm specializing in technology for the built environment, building systems, working with designers, developers, owners, operators of real estate to improve building occupant experience, health and safety, and building performance using data, digital solutions, focusing on technology strategy and programs through implementation and program deployment, and then also related engineering services, things like applying OT and IoT solutions, upgrades, doing building technology assessments, and then, related to high performance buildings, doing HVAC optimization, retrofits, upgrades. And I think there's I've seen from clients, I've talked to them about it a number of times, that there's a beneficial strategy for me to be able to provide services that are end to end, because a lot of times there's not a very particularly well-managed handoff between those phases of the life cycle of a building technology program. So as you kind of pointed out, I've got a bit of a strangely broad background that enables me to go from strategy through to sort of building level engineering. But, I'm starting to already see success in applying that model.
Yeah, the handoffs in our industry are, and that's one of the things I teach in the course. It's like there's so many different places for the handoffs to go wrong. That's definitely one of them. Yeah, strategy to, all the way to design to operations. Exactly. Cool. Yeah. That's such an amazing background. So let's talk about, I'm excited at all the things we could potentially unpack here. The question that I normally ask guests is, why is technology in buildings so far behind, say, the technology in our pockets? And I want to add a second piece of that for you, which is your LinkedIn headline, which is, maybe you can just share what your LinkedIn headline is as part of your answer.
I change it all the time, so I don't know which one you're referring to. I try to keep it fresh, just as a rule. But I think the most recent one, maybe the provocative one that you're referencing, was challenging CRE to be better. And then I've got this hashtag I use, buildings are not bonds.
That's the one. Yeah.
Yeah. So the challenging CRE to be better part, I think, it may be controversial to some people, but people in our neck of the woods certainly understand that that's something that needs to be done. Buildings are not bonds it really came from my time in real estate in general, but it's been particularly in the last 8 years or so, from 2013 on, I really worked in the operational side of real estate. So not so much, I have done lots of design and construction side stuff, but really the kind of operating buildings, how do we get data out of them? What do we do with it? How do we change operating processes? And, in operating buildings, margins are thin. I mean, a building is a fixed income asset. It is financed or expected to perform in a way that is a fixed income asset, like a bond.
Yep.
Meaning there's a maximum that you're going to get out of a building on rent in any given year. And there's a lot of downside and not a huge amount of upside, but it's fairly predictable income, stable over time. I mean, obviously disrupted right now in the office and retail sectors, but in general, these assets perform with a somewhat of a risk return profile of a fixed income asset versus like an equity. But buildings are not bonds. And oftentimes they are treated like bonds. They're securitized like bonds from a finance perspective. The key difference that I think a huge amount of the real estate industry does not appreciate is that a building is a product that people have to use.
Yeah.
So it is a fixed income asset, but it is a product that people need to be in, and for you to make money as an owner. And that is really, really evident right now.
Yeah.
Every office tenant right now is reducing its portfolio or planning to. I mean, make no mistake about it. They're all reducing in some capacity. Very few are going up versus what their previous trajectory may have been, even the big tech companies.
Right.
As people move towards, hybrid. So Scott Galloway, has been talking for a while about dispersion and how, commercial real estate, third largest asset class in the world, is going to have this massive value transfer to residential real estate, which we've already seen in prices. I just experienced that buying a house myself. And I think that's real. Now, I think maybe he's overplaying it a little bit. There will still be the need for assets, but the transition, James, like for me, shouldn't be just about like readjusting valuations of buildings and people taking a haircut on their bond. It's about making the product something that people want to use. And there's a lot of things that we can unpack about that at a high level. I was using that hashtag before COVID because it's just a real problem. Like too many people that have way too much power in real estate have no idea what goes on in the actual buildings or how they work or what they do for the people that go into them.
Absolutely. So what are some of the ways that you would then educate them on that?
Well, I mean, it's kind of starting to happen. Tenant experience has become, or workplace experience for corporate real estate groups it's not an old concept, but it's not quite new either. And it's developed quite a bit, particularly in the last few years. So, I mean, I think it's kind of starting to happen in some sense. Where I see a big lack of understanding, though, are around things that aren't just highlight like bullet points on a marketing sheet for a building. Mm-hmm. Like, does it have a gym? Does it have a cafe? Right. Does it have an outdoor terrace? That stuff is great and important. It's part of tenant experience. There are other things that matter about how buildings work too. Things on the cost side that I know you and I have worked on for, at least in my case, like a larger chunk of my career than maybe even I should have, like very specific topics around energy and maintenance and, sort of building optimization. That stuff matters particularly because of ESG investing on the CRE side. Like it's being pushed to the fore. But mm-hmm. There's a lot of things about building operations, just about what the building does and how it works, that people don't think about necessarily at the forefront. How people get in and out of the building, so access control and visitor management processes. Like if you look at the data that people like PropMoto or Leaseman or these companies that do this type of like worker survey for the office sector, it's stuff that makes people's lives easier that is always at the top of those surveys, and there's usually have the biggest gaps too. So it's, they're happy to have an outdoor terrace too, but like I see a lot of $40 or $50 million lobby projects in office buildings where it's like, okay, but if you're not putting in like a modern mobile badging, seamless access control system, like, yeah, you're not really doing what you need, to really improve the experience.
The way I describe that piece is like, don't waste my time. Like I have a very efficient life that I've designed inside my home. And when I go to the office, like the building shouldn't waste my time. Right. And that's how I've always phrased it, is like, there's so much friction in an average building from this point to that point to this point, So.
Yeah. Can we touch on your question about why technology is behind in buildings?
Yeah, so that was like buildings are not bonds. That's one reason. What's your broader answer? Yeah.
Well, I was thinking about this, because I knew you would ask that question, and I've done a lot with like sort of corporate technology in general, particularly when I think back to what I was doing with Deloitte and some of what we were doing with technology programs when I was at Cushman. When you're working for a corporate real estate client in general, even when you're working in the workplace side, you end up talking about the rest of their tech infrastructure in some way, shape, or form. And it gives me this perspective that I'm not sure that like us having an iPhone in our pocket is a fair comparison for buildings. I think that the question of whether or not like technology is behind in buildings is like relative to what? And if you view it relative to the average enterprise technology stack, even for companies, whom I won't name, but ought to be expected to be held to a higher standard, it can be very unsophisticated.
Okay.
Now, that's not to say that buildings aren't behind in some key areas. Cybersecurity is an area where I think a lot of buildings are definitely behind, but that's because, in a way, buildings were one of the first things that actually had connected systems to the internet. So I've said this before, like the concept of IoT, buildings had essentially what we call IoT like
long time ago,
30 years ago.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, and it's become more common to have it connected for remote monitoring by your BAS vendor or an energy management company or your building engineers to look it up at home. That's becoming more common and more new. But there were network systems of connected devices in buildings before just about everything other than, say, manufacturing and industrial plants.
Yeah.
So like
that's fair.
Buildings in a way adopted technology early, and then now it's hard to upgrade. It's expensive to upgrade over time. And that's the same with most big companies. One of the issues is that big is hard to maintain. When you're big, it's hard to maintain and update things. And a lot of buildings are just sort of big entities. The building automation system is expensive to replace.
Totally.
It's hard to shut a whole building off to put in a meter, So look, buildings have challenges, but I want to give, credit where it's due on that. Now, the answer to why they are behind to the extent they are behind is manifold. And we came up with a good framework for it, Doug and I, when we were at Cushman. We came up with 6 things that we saw that the way we put it was, what was preventing innovation in the built environment. And it's 6 things, and I'll list them. It's cost of entry or lack of clarity thereof, lack of skilled labor, confusing vendor market, inadequate infrastructure, which is probably the place where buildings tend to fall behind, is that 4th one. Time to value and ROI ambiguity. So those were the kind of categories we came up with. And I think that any program you're going to put in place, whether at a kind of company level or big program level, is going to need to address each of those in some way.
What was the first one again?
Cost of entry, or perceived cost of entry.
What do you mean by that?
Well, look, it's expensive relative to the operating budget of a lot of existing buildings to do something outside of the capital upgrade cycle that costs more than, say, 5 cents a square foot.
Right.
That starts to raise people's eyes. And that's not a lot of money if you think about it, right? In a 1 million square foot office building, which is not most office buildings, that is
50 grand. Yeah.
50 grand, right? So that's not a huge project. Now, if you can demonstrate savings on the back of that or make a change, you can start to generate the ROI, but just literally the cost of entry in a lot of situations is more, and this gets back to what buildings are not bonds. It's like, right, but then you also maybe spend 50 grand and can now all of a sudden do something like fault detection and diagnostics and find the 25% of your terminal units on average that aren't working and aren't providing air, to the people in the building in certain situations, right? So it may be worth it. But
all right, so let's just go through the 6 again. We don't have to unpack all of them. Cost of entry, skilled labor.
Yeah, lack of skilled labor. I mean, I think this one's straightforward, but it's in everyone that works in our value chain in building technology experiences this. But for something that all my clients want, there's not very many people that can deliver it. And particularly, I would say the biggest area where there is lacking if somebody's looking for where to focus their time or build a skill set that is useful to the market, if you took my sort of 3 stages of a program: strategy, and implementation, program management, and then kind of the engineering or building level technical things related to that, it's the middle one where there's not enough people. There are not enough people that can actually develop, manage, and then implement a technology program across all facets. So including operational changes, change management, the technology vendors, building level vendors.
Yeah.
That part is vastly under-resourced.
Yeah, and I call that the champion role. And my course is not hitting that yet, but that's the bucket that we're focused on. I totally agree that we need more people that can navigate that, implementing the strategy, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and when I worked for Gwen Mutton at GPG Advisors for a couple of years, and that is what they were really good at, was developing a program and then just slogging through to get it done. And so I had the opportunity to do some amazing, like this program we did with Taubman as a retail REIT based out of the Detroit area. It was, over 20 large shopping centers, full, meter deployment, BAS data integration. They developed an entire centralized, energy and operational data-based operations function, hiring an energy manager out of that. It was soup to nuts out of the ground, and they funded it, but it needed to be delivered on. And, we got a crash course in actually doing that. The next was confusing vendor markets. So this is one that we spent a lot of time on at Cushman with the digital buildings practice. And I know like JLL is very sophisticated in this respect too. And I'm sure CBRE is too. I just don't have as much knowledge about it, but there's a lot of companies doing a lot of things in prop tech, and that's growing. And I get sort of tired of like hearing every year about how there's just too many to manage and it's so hard and there's 3,000 companies that we're tracking. Yeah, that's true. The way to get through that is to talk to them all and try to develop frameworks and categories for what they do, segment the market, understand how they're the same, how they're different, try to put together some consolidated thought processes around the relationships that your organization, whether it's big like Cushman or small like the company that I'm building now, what kind of relationship we have with those vendors, and then, be the intermediary between the clients that know nothing about this or getting called by all those 3,000 companies and what they actually need. Like there's a lot of value in that. I've heard from numerous clients over the last 5 years that one of the services we bring that's valuable is being the lens, the filter on that for them.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I often play that role as well. You need somebody to do it. And what were the other two? Was there 2 more?
Yeah, 3 more. The last 2 are kind of related to each other. The inadequate infrastructure is the 4th one. And look, that obviously varies. What I always remind people or try to encourage people who are thinking about, particularly people that manage like a lot of real estate, multiple buildings, multiple cities, big portfolios, corporate or commercial, is you got to think of things in distribution. Like as a first approximation, think of everything in a bell curve, at least just for a mental model. So if I say inadequate infrastructure, some segment of people are going to say, well, we've got great infrastructure. It's like, okay, but think of it in terms of a bell curve, right? Because if you're a really big company, if you're Brookfield or someone that's really big and got a lot of buildings, you have take any given type of technology, network or security system or building automation, there's some kind of distribution of sophistication. You have some buildings that are great. You have some buildings that are still using pneumatic controls for everything. Right. Not that that's bad, but it's certainly behind the time. And then you've got a lot stuck in the middle, right? And so this is the area where I get the most frustrated about the whole buildings are not bonds thing. Is it's like, if you have systems that are fundamental to keeping that revenue stream coming in for your fixed income asset, you need to maintain them. And everyone's used to doing that when they think of it like, I have the maintenance guy come out once a year for the chiller. They're used to absorbing that. Technology doesn't work like that. And operational technology doesn't work like that. It's increasingly needing updates regularly. And so Johnson Controls is telling you to update Metasys once a quarter because they're doing quarterly releases now, or I don't know that they are, but they're doing more rapid releases than they used to. very few people are doing that. They pretend like that building automation system is like a computer that they bought and they don't ever need to update Windows.
Afterthought.
Yeah. And they literally don't update Windows on that computer in a lot of cases, right? And so it's like, it just doesn't, OT is not concrete. It needs to be treated. It doesn't just like live until it dies. Like there's care and feeding that needs to go into it. And so, that is one of the things where buildings are behind. They need to treat their technology more like a modern technology. It's not so much that they don't have it. We did a big survey when I was at Cushman on all the property management buildings, and it was like basically 95% of buildings in North America had a digital building automation system. It was a way higher number than I would guess.
Oh, wow. That's
and that was a big statistical sample, hundreds of buildings that responded in that survey, and so it's like, okay, the buildings that a company like that are managing, they've got BAS, but 25% still had pneumatic controls in some form too, if I remember the numbers correctly. So there's this legacy of updating the older parts of that system.
Totally.
And then the last two are just around basically ROI. So time to ROI, ambiguity around ROI. How do you measure ROI? Can you measure the ROI in the way that the finance guys are used to? That one you've got to tackle on an individual basis. The things that I learned the most from Doug, who still leads the digital buildings group, or digital advisory group at Cushman, was the kind of order of how to think about that and work with the clients on that. So, and where and how you think about metrics to measure success. We struggled a lot with that in the early days of when I joined Switch. And I think the whole industry's gotten a lot better about that now. But, you still have to get to a level of comfort with each individual client about what ROI means.
Oh, absolutely.
And how to measure it, right?
Yeah, everybody's, balance sheet's different. Everybody's income statement's different. Everybody has different budgets, different ways they slice their budgets, different room and different budgets, right? The whole business case is always custom. Yeah, every project I've worked on, it's custom. So
also their thought and perception of non-quantitative metrics, the qualitative things that come with a program, just so that you're contributing to like kind of a greater good versus just measuring like how much energy you save at each building. Also portfolio effects. I mean, again, bell curve, right? So like sometimes I used to say like I could go into any big commercial building and probably find like 8 to 10% energy savings at like relatively no cost, like OPEX style savings, not like replace the chiller plant. I mean, you can always get savings doing that. And I think generally speaking, that was true. I'm a bit more far removed from specifically doing like energy focused programs, but like you can usually find that much money. But you'll get clients sometimes that are like, why didn't we get 15% savings at every building? And it's like, well, because again, like we did this at 20 buildings and some were really good, a few, some we had a bigger savings than that. And really it's some kind of distribution that like approximates a normal curve. You have to be really careful when you're cherry picking like pilot sites.
Oh yeah.
It's like, are you expecting to hit this number that is going to be an average at the 2 or 3 pilot sites we're doing out of your 50?
Right.
Then we need to very carefully select them, and so there's just a lot of complexity in that.
Yeah. The other piece of business case complexity is around who accepts like what level of fluffiness, right? So we have metrics like productivity, and different businesses accept different levels of scrutiny around those types of numbers, and which makes it really difficult as well. So like energy is usually like a hard number, and then the other ones are a little bit more fluffy, and it's like that's kind of bespoke as well, like tailoring that argument to each different building owner.
That's the big deal with indoor air quality. I read Healthy Buildings over the summer. I think like a lot of us did, Joseph Allen and John Macomber from Harvard. John Macomber was my professor for 2 classes and the sponsor of my field study I did with McKinstry while I was at HBS. And John, I'm sure, was the one that did all those financial, because he's the finance guy. He did a lot of those financial projections around, essentially corporate HR calculations, saying, just sort of demonstrating the JLL 330-300 concept that like, your people and productivity matter way more than your energy budget or even your real estate costs, which I think we all know intuitively. And I think the math is completely plausible and for the right audience, that type of spreadsheet makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It is rare, unfortunately, that the incentives accrue to the building level or even the like FM team level for productivity.
Yeah.
And so that is still a very hard case to make, in a lot of situations. You have to get together stakeholders at a much higher level than we're often, interacting with.
Totally. Yeah. And how I teach it in the course is tangible versus non-tangible. And you have to basically define that with your stakeholder. Well, I love that list. That's an awesome list. I've asked that question probably 30 times now. And that was the most detailed answer that I've gotten yet, which is awesome.
Hey guys, just another quick note from our sponsor, Nexus Labs, and then we'll get back to the show. This episode is brought to you by Nexus Foundations, our introductory course on the smart buildings industry. If you're new to the industry, this course is for you. If you're an industry vet but want to understand how technology is changing things, this course is also for you. The alumni are raving about the content, which they say pulls it all together, and they also loved getting to meet the other students on the weekly Zoom calls and in the private chat room. You can find out more about the course at courses.nexuslabs.online. All right, back to the interview.
I want to ask you, so one of the most popular episodes on this podcast has been with Google. So it was Keith Berkebin and Trevor Sodorf. And Trevor works for DB Engineering, so he's a consultant to Google. But I wanted to ask you about your experience. So you worked at Cushman Wakefield and supporting Google. So can you kind of explain kind of what you guys did there? And I'll probably have some follow-up questions for you.
I mean, I basically fell into being an original member of that team. So I worked very closely with Keith and Keith's team and Mark, who Keith works for, and alongside Trevor. I know Trevor had worked with Daryl Smith, who was my client at Cushman, going back to his days at Microsoft. DB really got off the ground at scale, working out of the rock at Microsoft and optimizing that campus and doing great work for Daryl. And then when Daryl came over to Google, DB came with him and was doing similar work. So I joined the CW account at the beginning of its third month. So a few of the people on the leadership team of that account, they'd been working on sort of the transition and then had been there for 2 months. The DB team had worked alongside the people on the Cushman team that set up the centralized operations center out there for that portfolio, which has been very, very successful. Cushman came off the ground there, separating hard services and soft services, out of the gate. So if a Google employee, a Googler, submitted a ticket for any kind of hard services category through the ticketing system, that routed through a different process than going to the site level FM, which is the way it would work at a lot of, corporate real estate accounts. It would go to the person at the building or the region. Mm-hmm. Instead, it's funneled centrally through the ops center. So everything that we did was sort of around that lens of the operations center, and DB's work was coordinated through and part of the budget of the critical operations team out there.
Okay.
So it's a very interesting model, was just super interesting. I was incredibly, fortunate. I loved working with that team. So the role I played really was to be, again, kind of the program manager for what they set up. And Google has done a lot of amazing work, the sort of open source framework for building tagging that they developed, based off Brick and Haystack. And that whole project was more on the software side, very much Trevor and Keith's world. And I'm familiar with what they did, but I'm not really a software engineer per se. So that
was the crux of the interview with those two, was like the ontology and mostly the software side, supervisory control and that thing.
So I contributed a significant amount into the way that I think they were, thinking about that stuff, but Trevor was really on top of all of that. And so what Trevor and I really worked together to do, and a lot of our team, we had some project managers that worked on it too, was to get the data out of the building automation system and do the integration project. Now, we came in and they had some massive advantages out of the gate. I mean, Google had done an amazing job. Dan and others out there had built a very standardized building automation system with a very high quality implementation. And they have, the operations center out at Google largely runs out of that building automation system. It's of a high enough quality that it does a significant amount of the sort of data platforming just through, ALC, BACnet, BMS. Okay. There's some disadvantages to that and things that they're trying to work on. Alarming was still a big challenge, things like that you get some of the big scale BMS challenges. But we basically selected the data points across all of this fairly standardized implementation and did the kind of analysis to integrate about 250,000 data points into the data lake that they used to build that ontology.
Okay.
And so credit to Google for having standardized all that long before we ever got there. But that was still a very heavy lift. We had to work with their integration supplier, Bitbox. They had to get BACnet drivers written and tested. That rolled out across, when I left that account in April of 2019 and I last looked at that, we had integrated like 165 buildings of data in 9 months, and there was ongoing work around metering and verifying the meter calculations and things to make sure sub-metering was all correct. But there was like several thousand sub-meters that were going into that as well. And so that kind of got the plumbing set up for the data lake that then they were able to do interesting stuff on going forward.
Got it. Cool. That whole implementation and then what interests me around it. So I've only talked to Trevor and Keith about it and now you about it. But what interests me is I follow a lot of Google's sustainability efforts. And so seeing them sort of pushing the envelope and trying to get to 24/7 carbon-free energy, they call it, and then hearing about what's happening, actually in the field at the point level, it's interesting watching, like, imagining those two ends of the spectrum coming together. Really, I haven't heard a lot of corporations, number one, set that goal out, right? Carbon-free energy. And number two, say, okay, well, obviously we have to figure out the controls and the buildings and the data aspect of this. And it seems like they're really leaders on both of those types of things right now.
Yeah. And a lot of those efforts aren't, directly connected, but they're all part of the same vision. And I have to say, like, as a company, they're interesting because they treat big and small almost with the same importance. Like, that was a really big integration project we did, but in a way, like, to your point, it's all about kind of the micro level. Like, how do we set up an ontology that's like atomic from the ground up, that we use whereas there's people that are working on like carbon offsets for 24/7, net zero energy certification. So it really is super interesting. And a lot of the people we worked with on the energy side, I did quite a bit related to the utilities budget and energy management and things out there. Were also people that had done a lot of wholesale energy procurement and wind power deals in the past, PPAs and things like that were all related to offsets. So it's a super sophisticated facilities team out there, and the Cushman team is amazing too. Really, really good. I'd worked with a lot of corporate real estate groups before across a lot of the different companies. That's a really strong team.
Awesome. Cool. Well, I'll be attempting to pull more of those types of people that are leading into the podcast. So we'll see. You want to talk about a little smart building strategy next?
Sure.
So can you just kind of give your definition of strategy? So earlier you talked about strategy, basically implementing the strategy, and then engineering, design, basically program management.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming strategy in your mind comes before the program management. You have to create the strategy to then implement it. So how do you think about this?
I think strategy is all about taking a step back and figuring out what you want to do and why you want to do it, right? Mm-hmm. It doesn't need to be any more complicated than that. I think strategy in general is a word that you can stuff a lot into. Mm-hmm. I think it's a suitcase word. You can stuff a lot of different things into it. It's overused. Having gone through the MBA and management consulting world, like it's almost meaningless how much that word is used. But like the concept is that it means you're zooming out and not thinking about the detail. You're thinking about the planning and what you want to do. So like there's a lot of useful frameworks to think about. What is the general strategic vision for the company or the real estate group? What are you trying to accomplish? Why do you want to accomplish it? How do we then define that in some outcomes that are business metrics, like we talked about, qualitative or quantitative? How do we move that into a set of technology capabilities that will help us achieve those outcomes or goals? And that's kind of an iterative process, because sometimes you can get new business outcomes by having new technology capabilities, but in general, they kind of go together. And then you just sort of move on from there. And it's more of like a design process. Let's figure out what the tech needs to do, which use cases we want to select, how do we want to improve the user experience for whoever the user groups are. Always important to note in real estate that we sometimes just assume who the user group is, but it's usually either people in the building that use the building as occupants, or it's the people that manage the building or analyze it or in kind of the back end process of it. Both are very important user bases. It's important to design for them. But that kind of process of figuring that out in advance is really what a strategy phase is all about.
Yeah.
So, really defining that out and then taking that into a plan or a roadmap that starts to define what the program is going to be.
Totally. And what do you think some of the challenges are for real estate groups with basically figuring stuff out in advance?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole raft of challenges because usually people come in with a preconceived notion that's based off of a vendor that sold something to them. So one of the biggest challenges I encounter is like, hey, do you know so-and-so? And it's like, yes. And they're like, what do you think? Well, here's what I think, but like, I have to give you a nuanced answer because I really need to know what you want to do to answer that.
Right.
So I think this about them. I think that they do these things within this space that achieve these type of things. And they're probably good on this and maybe not good on this. But it's like, people
but how
are just
is
like,
that relevant to what you're trying to do? Yeah.
Yeah, people, or they're just like, oh, we just thought we'd buy it because it was good. Like this happened to us a lot. This happened to me a lot in every consulting type role I've had.
Yeah.
So putting things in that context and zooming out, seeing the forest before you go into the trees is really important. And so that's kind of the primary challenge, is usually getting people to recognize that they need to take a step back and think it through. Having the right stakeholders at the table is always a challenge because you always come into an organization, usually through facilities or real estate, or if it's a commercial real estate group, through an asset manager or an operations person, or occasionally it's through like a central shared services function that kind of manages this. Occasionally, maybe it's through the IT group. It's almost never who you need to actually get a strategy in place.
Right.
I mean, basically almost never is it just a one-off building project. If it is, you've probably gone to an engineering consultant, a pure play engineering consultant to do it. And in a lot of cases, for a long time, that's meant that you got a kind of suboptimal outcome for the broader portfolio. So like, we need to do the mobile badge access control in this building. And if that kind of comes through the property management team at that building, you're usually not thinking about how that can be applied to the portfolio, right? Which is a myth. Yeah. So elevating to the right level, getting the right stakeholders in the room, always a challenge. It takes time. Part of the reason that this is slow, because these are enterprise consulting processes, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you help people with that? Because I know strategy is one of the things that you're focusing on with System2.
Yeah, where required. I mean, there's a lot of other good strategists out there, people that focus on that, so that doesn't necessarily need to come from us, but in a lot of cases, it does need to, because you were brought in to look at a building, or you were brought in to look at a specific type of system, and then it becomes clear that it's worth zooming out. So, it's about getting people to recognize the value in doing that, and then taking them through a structured thinking process. It's modern strategy consulting is starting to look a lot more and more like a design process. I mean, those things are kind of converging in a way. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean like building design. I mean like the kind of ideation and thinking process.
Yep.
So it depends on what the client wants to do. If they really want to think through it holistically, it's going to start to look a lot more like a design process. Well, let's envision what the future could look like, and then think about how we sort of back into that from where you are now.
Yep.
Sometimes it is more just about like building the financial model, and so the kind of strategy phase could really be part of the program development phase, where it's like, look, we know we want to do these sets of things, and likely at this target set of buildings, what is it going to take to do that? And it's more about kind of technology planning, a lot more of what like a traditional technology consultant would do.
Yeah, I think sometimes the ideation or the design phase might get skipped but then you have to at least come back to the user engagement at some point, right? How is this fitting into the user's workflow? How are we going to get them to use it? like things like that still have to happen at some point, right? And yeah, so I like to think of that piece as like, can that be part of the strategy as well? And it doesn't always happen up front as well. And at least that's how we teach it in the course. Yeah.
Most of what prop tech is trying to do is fundamentally digital transformation of some variety. I mean, there's very few pure play, this just replaces something we already do and it's fundamentally better. There's some of those, and those are companies that are actually very successful. They can build scaled channel businesses really quickly.
Right.
But like that is the minority of prop tech businesses. And a lot of it is convincing people to do new things, which is inherently a transformation type of process. And so taking a step back, starting with the like what we want to do and why and how we want to measure that, you know, it is an important step to take. You know, again, usually almost never one building, one technology that's driving an initiative. It's usually a category of things that they're looking at, a set of value drivers, like there's, you know, an ESG focus. What do we do to improve sustainability and highlight, you know, transparent reporting or cost reduction, or, you know, and then at that point, it starts to look like management consulting. I mean, you're looking at enterprise value drivers, and you need to let that flow through. Now, you still have a lens on the technology market. We know the goal, a lot of times the goal is to be a more innovative organization. I mean, we have clients that just, it's the innovation group or committee that are, you know, driving this. But then you still need to go backwards from that and say, well, then what is it that's going to prove the innovation, right? Innovation or why? What are the reasons?
Totally. I think something also, I definitely struggle with the strategy, and like there's the inserting tech into a workflow, like that's an easy way to create a use case for technology. But then the digital transformation piece is like, well, this workflow is messed up and we need to do this entire department differently. And I feel like it's something I've struggled with in the course, because smart buildings often require transformation of how we're doing things in the business today. And I've always tried to, for at least the course, which is an introductory course, tried to draw a boundary around, like, we're not talking about full scale digital transformation in this course. But the other piece I've struggled with is the aspect that you can implement one use case, right? And that might require a certain technology stack, right? But you could also use that same technology stack for 25 other use cases. And so now you're kind of blowing up this strategy or this program. So how do you think about like these different layers of technology when it comes to strategy?
I think that is one of the keys to thinking about a strategy, right? Is like ultimately, like the solutions you select need to be part of an architecture that supports future goals. And so, you know, there's definitely things you want to measure in the short term. You know, we talked about ROI ambiguity as a challenge, but the best companies that are doing this are ones that are thinking about, you know, they understand the platform concept. They're laying foundation and then building layers upon that enable future capabilities down the line. So take something like, you know, networking in buildings. Foundational backbone of anything connected is that it can communicate on a network. All the things you hear about with monitoring and sensor technologies and IoT solutions and data platforms and even just metering and a lot of the experience related things. So modern access control systems that utilize mobile, visitor management solutions, digital signage, those things all benefit from having, you know, in a commercial building setting, a base building network, or in a corporate setting, having like a dedicated VLAN for operational technology, or however they set up their architecture, right? And so like that is a bottom layer type thing. And so, you know, there's a lot of frameworks where you can think of this, but you have to think of it in stages, right? That sort of begin with foundational layers sort of at the building, at the edge, and then ultimately end up with people, process, users, and, you know, change, transformation at the top stage. And in between are all the things we normally think about as technology, all the bits and pieces, the devices, the protocols, how they communicate from edge to cloud infrastructure itself, you know, the software layers that sit on top of that do analytics or data processing, the integrations between platforms, and at that point that share and exchange data. I mean, I'm doing a project right now where I'm working with a corporate client that, one of the things we've done is kind of specify a lot of the integrations to enable this service design architecture that's been developed for their workplace of the future. And it's a lot of integration, many lines in a spreadsheet to enable that. And so you've got to prioritize them and build them in a roadmap, and that's all about those layers. It took a lot of building up what all the foundational components were before we got to that part where we could say, well, these are the things that need to communicate with each other.
Totally.
And that kind of systems thinking, around how this stuff actually interoperates, it's a tricky thing to do. I mean, it's something that I've had to learn to build the muscles around doing that.
For sure. And I think what you just talked about, getting pulled into a project, I think there are so many of us that get pulled into projects. And if you look back upstream, that project doesn't have a strategy behind it.
Right.
I just feel like it's more and more, it's needed more and more. They're like that zoom out conversation. And you don't want to delay things because everyone wants to do a project, right? But projects go better if they have some sort of backing behind them. So I've seen you do a bunch of different posts on LinkedIn around reset. And so I just wanted to talk about kind of like where IAQ is in March 2021, because I haven't had any of my recent projects working on IAQ. And I know it's just moving so rapidly due to COVID, obviously. And I just wanted to get basically pretend I don't know anything about what's going on. Tell me about reset. Tell me about what's going on with indoor air quality in our industry right now.
Sure, yeah. I mean, within the world of indoor air quality as a topic, there's a big community that's been involved with that, but it's been, I think, somewhat boutique until the last couple of years. And a couple things have changed. Okay, one is the indoor air quality monitor technology. The IoT solution side has evolved to the point where you can buy high quality commercial grade monitors at a reasonable cost, at kind of real estate construction cost scale. So it's just viable, and it wasn't before. So before, the best you could.
What sort of sensors?
Yeah, so IAQ monitors. So this is where reset comes into play. So within that IAQ world, there are some standards that are looking to sort of certify either space or technology products. Reset has basically developed the standard for a bunch of pieces of that monitoring value chain. So they've developed an accredited professional program. I became accredited along with several people from the sustainability and energy team on the commercial side at Cushman. In November, we did the class together. And so that's kind of like being a lead AP. I'll talk in a minute about what those people would do. But they've also developed a certification, of course, commensurate with that for buildings. So there's a commercial interior and a core and shell standard to get the plaque on the wall.
Okay.
But they've also developed a standard for the technology. So they've developed a monitor standard, which is for the actual sensors. Then they call a group of sensors a monitor. There's basically 5 variables, like the IAQ 5 that you measure for in any sort of leading indoor air quality sensor package: temperature, relative humidity, CO2, TVOC, small organic compounds, and particulate matter, PM2.5 as the standard. Some of them will throw in a CO monitor, like as a CO alarm. Some of the outdoor sensors include things like inorganic gases like NOx, nitrogen oxides, that are outdoor pollution issues. But the IAQ 5 for the indoor monitors, kind of the standard.
Okay.
That sensor technology's come a long way, but there was no one that said, like, this is a commercial grade monitor. There were these consumer grade monitors that have some challenges technically on the, just the quality of the sensors. There were lab grade monitors, which were, $10,000 lab type equipment. There wasn't a consumer grade monitor. They developed a standard for that, and a number of companies have developed products and become certified for that. At the same time, they've developed a standard for the data platform side, which is essentially a data quality standard. So if you have a data platform like switches, that is an operational data platform, or it could be anything, right? Some are big, some are small, some are part of vertically integrated IoT solutions, but it has to just meet these standards. It has to provide 5-minute interval data. At this frequency, you have to connect it to the reset API. It has to aggregate 5-minute readings into 30-minute averages according to the standard. And then they get certified after a period of time to basically be plugged into the reset cloud. And then all of the kind of analytics part of reset is automated at that point.
Okay.
So what an AP does is they will look at the project, say, this is what you need to do. These are where you need to put the monitors to get the standard certification process started. Go help do that, get them deployed online.
Okay.
The data platform is already connected to RESET, and the data starts flowing. And then basically RESET is 100% performance-based standard. There's no checklist or certification about how to achieve it. It's just standard, these thresholds, within these parameters, basically, for this period of time, and you get certified.
Wow.
And it's those 5 variables, basically. So it's really super powerful because it opens up flexibility for how people can actually comply with the standard. There's other good IAQ standards out there. I'm doing some interesting work with Aerated that's out of the UK, very interesting approach. Also has some performance-based elements they've developed in design and operations, more checklist style. One of the downsides of RESET is if you don't think you're going to get it, you don't have a lot of incentive to go try. Because you put out the monitors, and if you're not going to hit the CO2 numbers, or you think you're not, then it's like, well, I should do the project to remediate to get to where I'm going to achieve RESET. And a lot of times people don't know how to do that, right? They need a checklist to do that, or an engineer to come in and do the evaluation. So Aerated is very interesting there. UL's got a program that I'm learning about right now that's certifying space as well. So there's other things going on out there, but definitely indoor environmental quality is becoming a much bigger percentage of mind share of the kind of sustainability certification world. And that started with 5-6 years ago as it started to come into prominence. LEED has really, I think, emphasized IEQ a lot more in the later versions of the standard as well. So there's interesting stuff going on there.
You mentioned to me earlier about how IAQ monitors, now that I know what that term means, actually, should be thought of more like meters than automation. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So if you were going to do, say, air quality monitoring historically, and there's still a lot of people I've talked to even recently that kind of have this perspective, they're like, why wouldn't I just integrate the sensors into my building automation system? Or like, I've got a Jakes, I've got Tritium, like I can just pull in the data there. And it's, yes, technically you can do that. But, there are some challenges around that. CO2 sensors, and especially the VOC sensors, drift quite a bit. And so the commercial grade monitors, when RESET does that certification for them, they actually compare them to those grade A, tens of thousands of dollar lab monitors as a reference. So they are held to that, they're measured with very accurate lab style equipment, and they have to hit a certain data accuracy for a certain period of time. It's a rigorous process to get certified. And the sensor that your BAS vendor is going to install has not gone through that process. Let's just say that. It also is missing some important, most likely, it is missing some important software capabilities, whether that's firmware at the box level or cloud-based, monitored, managed, that is doing some of that recalibration for those variables that tend to drift or bias over time. So there's some disadvantages to doing it in your BAS. I'm still always happy to see a building that has CO2-based demand control at the zone level, because that they're going to have good air quality in that conference room, better air quality if it's working right.
Yeah.
Than if it's just temperature-based alone. But the sort of right way, the better way to maybe achieve that use case increasingly would be to go with a company like Aware that has built a backnet version of their monitor and pull the data into the BAS directly using a higher quality monitor for that. Plus then you get the other variables, you get the particulate matter, you get the VOCs, all the other things that matter.
I see.
So the reason it's more like a meter is because there's sort of two things that you want to pay attention to get a good sense of IAQ. And the best analog for this is energy. So if you want to get a good sense for what's going on with energy, you want meter on the main building feeds, and maybe some sub-meters if they're high value to disaggregate category loads. And then you want to pay attention to the things that are using energy. So I still a lot of times we'll go in with clients that are wanting to over sub-meter, and I was like, don't spend the money on all the extra sub-meters. You get nothing from a marginal sub-meter. You might as well pay attention to the thing that's using 50 to 60% of your energy in the average building, and that's the HVAC. So you're much better off putting in place HVAC fault detection and diagnostics, or some sort of analytic capability that is, it's like your blood pressure. Like, I don't need to take my blood pressure every 5 minutes. If my blood pressure is high, I know what I need to do. I need to eat better and exercise and eat less salt and all those,
Right.
similar kind of situation, right? So IAQ is the exact same thing. You want to monitor the IAQ as an output of the processes that affect it, the people breathing in the space, the materials off-gassing, the HVAC working or not working like it's supposed to.
Mm-hmm.
Those are processes that produce air quality. And so you want to monitor that, like with a meter, just like with electricity, like I still do want that main meter on the building and the useful sub meters. I want to know what's going on. I want both. They're independent checks on each other. And so, it really isn't so much about where the data is integrated through. I think the technical people kind of conflate that. It's about the sort of purpose of the data. One is about seeing the output of the process of the building, what's actually going on in the room or in the building or with it. The other is about what's going on with the system that is sort of supposed to be managing that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the BMS, as everyone's heard on this podcast, me complain about, that it's not very good a steward of the data that once it gets in there to be able to measure the output and see analytics on it and things like that. So, well, we're a little bit over our time today. I have a sense that we could go on forever, Aaron. So thanks so much. What are you excited about in 2021 that you're looking forward to?
Well, I mean, I'm excited about starting, this firm and really getting it off the ground and seeing the growth there. And that's starting to happen. So it's exciting. I'm also just really excited for a lot of my clients that I'm seeing have success and drive these types of initiatives. And a lot of at the same time, a lot of companies on the supply side, the prop tech vendors that are seeing acceleration in what had been a kind of a slow market.
Yeah.
And while real estate has taken a big hit here, commercial real estate, if anything, we've just seen that sort of a major shift in focus towards what the buildings actually do and how they work and whether or not they're providing the right experience, the right level of health. And to some extent, it's abstracted, building technology and prop tech away from just energy or very specific individual vertical value drivers to this sort of broader strategic perspective. Like, I need the building to be a sustainable, healthy, valuable asset that my customers, our tenants, want to use. Or in the case of a corporate real estate group, that's going to bring our employees back and provide them the experience that they deserve. As the use cases for the built environment kind of change and shift here. So there's been a huge acceleration in that. Technology is part of that, but it's also just seeing real estate get better.
Totally. Love it. All right. Thanks so much for coming on the show and dropping your wisdom. Best of luck with System2 this year.
Thanks, James. Happy to do it.
All right, friends. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Nexus Podcast. For more episodes like this and to get the weekly Nexus newsletter, which, by the way, readers have said is the best way to stay up to date on the future of the smart buildings industry, please subscribe at nexuslabs.online. You can find the show notes for this conversation there as well. Have a great day.